The Humvee rumbled to a halt outside the bunker, its engine coughing dust into the dry Iraqi air. Private Collins squinted through the grime-streaked window at the squat concrete structure, its entrance a gaping maw of shadow. The place looked like something out of a war movie Saddam era, all brutalist angles and peeling paint. "Home sweet home," Sergeant Hayes muttered, slamming the door behind him. His voice was gruff, but Collins caught the edge in it. Even Hayes, a man who'd seen Fallujah at its worst, didn't seem thrilled about this assignment. Lieutenant Carter unfolded a map across the hood of the Humvee, tracing a gloved finger along their grid coordinates. "Command wants this place secured. Locals say it's been used as a staging ground for insurgents. We sweep it, clear it, hold it." Collins adjusted his rifle strap, scanning the barren landscape. The bunker sat alone in the desert, miles from Tikrit proper. No signs of life, just wind and the occasional scuttle of a lizard. The interpreter, a wiry local named Rafiq, lingered near the entrance, his fingers worrying the hem of his shirt. "This place, it is not good," he said quietly. Hayes snorted. "Yeah, well, neither's the rest of this sandbox." Rafiq shook his head. "No, before the war, this was a place of bad things." Collins frowned. "What kind of bad things?" Rafiq hesitated, then muttered something in Arabic before translating. "Men were brought here. Many men. They did not leave." A chill prickled the back of Collins' neck, despite the desert heat. "Superstition," Hayes said, though his jaw tightened. "Let's move." Inside, the bunker was a tomb of stale air and rusted metal. Their boots echoed off concrete walls stained with old, dark patches oil maybe, or something else. Collins tried not to look too closely. The first whisper came as they cleared the main chamber. A hiss of breath, just at the edge of hearing. Collins spun, rifle raised, but the corridor behind him was empty. "You hear that?" he asked. Hayes didn't even glance back. "Hear what?" Collins swallowed. "Nothing. Just wind, but there was no air down here." By nightfall, the whispers had grown, not words, not quite just sounds like someone choking. The men joked about desert ghosts, but the laughter died too quickly. "What's on?" Then the radios crackled. Static at first, then a voice garbled, distant, screaming. Hayes ripped the headset off like it had burned him. "Goddamn interference," he muttered, but his hands shook as he adjusted the frequency. Collins didn't sleep that night. Somewhere in the dark, something whispered his name. And for the first time, he wondered if Rafiq had been right. The bunker's single bulb flickered, casting jagged shadows across the concrete walls. Private Collins shifted in his chair, the legs scraping against the floor like nails on bone. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic old blood. Maybe, though he tried not to dwell on it. Sergeant Hayes leaned against the radio console, arms crossed, his face unreadable in the dim light. "First watch is always the worst," he grunted, too quiet. "Lets your head play tricks." Collins nodded, but his fingers tightened around his rifle. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the bunker itself was holding its breath. Outside, the desert wind howled, but down here, there was nothing. No scuttling of rats, no creak of settling concrete. Just the hum of the generator and the occasional crackle of the radio. Then, a whisper. Collins stiffened. It was faint, barely more than a breath, but it slithered through the stillness like a snake. A man's voice, rasping, choked. "You hear that?" he hissed, swiveling toward the darkened hallway. Hayes didn't look up. "Hear what?" That voice. The sergeant sighed, rubbing his temples. Kid, you've been awake for 18 hours. Your brain's frying. Drink some water. Collins opened his mouth to argue, but the whisper came again, closer this time. A word, maybe. A name. His name. The blood drained from his face. Hayes caught the shift in his expression and straightened, his hand drifting to his sidearm. Collins, breathe. It's just. A scream tore through the bunker. Not from the radio. Not from outside. From the hallway. Hayes was on his feet in an instant, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The scream cut off as abruptly as it had started, leaving only a ringing silence. Contact? Collins whispered, pulse hammering in his throat. Hayes didn't answer. His light swept the empty corridor, the concrete walls glistening with damp. Then, slowly, he lowered the flashlight. Nothing, probably just the wind catching the pipes. But there were no pipes down that hall. Collins exhaled shakily. Right, wind. The radio crackled to life. Static first, then a voice. Garbled, broken, but unmistakably human. Help us. Hayes lunged for the dial, twisting it sharply. The voice vanished, swallowed by white noise. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hayes cleared his throat. Interference happens out here. Desert plays with signals. Collins wanted to believe him. But the voice hadn't sounded distant. It had sounded close, like it was right beside them. The bulb above them flickered again. And in the split second of darkness, Collins could have sworn he saw a shadow too tall standing at the end of the hall. Then the light returned. The hallway was empty. Hayes didn't look at him. Next watch is in 4 hours. Try to get some sleep. Collins didn't sleep. Somewhere in the dark, the whispers began again. The whispers didn't stop. They coiled through the bunker like smoke, threading under doors, slipping through cracks in the concrete. At first, Collins told himself it was the wind, but the desert outside had gone still, the night air thick and unmoving. The only sound was the erratic sputter of the generator and the low, guttural murmurs that weren't quite words. Then the temperature dropped. One moment, the air was stifling, sweat beading on Collins' neck. The next, his breath fogged in front of him, the cold so sudden it burned. His fingers stiffened around his rifle. Hayes noticed it too. He exhaled sharply, watching the vapor curl between them. What was that? The radio crackled. A burst of static, then a voice, not the broken plea from before, but something worse. A scream. Human, raw, stretched thin with terror. It filled the room, clawing at Collins' eardrums. Hayes grabbed the handset. Command, this is Echo 7. Do you copy? We've got. The scream cut off. Silence. Then, from the speaker, a whisper, they're here. Hayes' knuckles whitened. He mashed the transmit button. Command, respond. Possible hostile contact. Request immediate backup. A voice crackled back, tinny and dismissive. Echo 7. Confirm your last. Sensors show no movement in your sector. Probable wildlife interference. Maintain position. Collins' stomach twisted. Wildlife? That wasn't. Hayes silenced him with a sharp gesture. He tried again. Voice tight. Negative command. We have audible contact. Unidentified. Requesting. The radio screeched a sound like metal tearing, then died. Dead air. Hayes slammed the handset down. Goddamn desert. Comms are toast. Collins wasn't listening. His gaze locked onto the hallway behind Hayes. The shadows there didn't move, didn't shift with the flickering light. They clung to the walls like stains, too deep, too solid. And then a shape. Tall, too tall, shoulders hunched beneath the low ceiling. No face, just a smear of darkness where features should be. It stood at the edge of the light, motionless. Colin's mouth went dry. Sarge. Hayes turned. The shadow was gone. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Hayes exhaled, slow and controlled. "You seeing things now, Private?" Collins opened his mouth. A thud echoed from deep in the bunker. Then another. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming closer. Hayes' hand went to his sidearm. "Reynolds?" he called out. "Is that you?" No answer. Just the footsteps. Closer. Colin's pulse hammered in his throat. The air smelled like rust and something sour, like old meat left in the sun. The radio burst to life again. This time, no static. Just a voice familiar, but wrong. The syllables stretched and broken. "Hayes, help me," Reynolds' voice. But Reynolds was supposed to be on perimeter watch. Outside. Hayes' face went pale. He grabbed the handset. "Reynolds, report your position." The radio cut off mid-word. The footsteps stopped, right outside the door. Colin's finger hovered over his rifle's trigger. The cold was unbearable now, gnawing at his bones. Then silence. Nothing. Hayes edged toward the door, weapon raised. He kicked it open. Empty hallway. No footprints in the dust. No Reynolds. Just the whispers, slithering back in. And this time, they were laughing. Lieutenant Carter's voice crackled over the radio, sharp with command. "All units, regroup at the central chamber. Full sweep now." Collins exchanged a glance with Hayes. The sergeant's jaw was set, his grip on his rifle too tight. Neither of them mentioned the voice on the radio. Neither of them had to. The squad assembled in the bunker's main chamber, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. The air smelled of damp concrete and something older copper and rot. Carter stood over a rusted metal desk, his gloved fingers tracing dark stains on its surface. "Blood," he said flatly. "Old, but not old enough to be from Saddam's time." Rafik lingered near the entrance, his eyes darting to the shadows. "This place was used after," he murmured. "After the war. For other things." Hayes shot him a glare, spit it out. Rafiku swallowed. "Interrogations. Executions. The walls here, they have seen much." Colin's flashlight beam caught a glint on the floor. He crouched, brushing dust aside. A bullet casing, tarnished but unmistakable. Then another, and another. A pattern like someone had stood in one spot and fired methodically. "Jesus," muttered Private Reynolds, shifting his weight. They lined them up. Carter's expression darkened. "Check the walls. Look for records. Anything left behind." The men spread out, their boots scuffing through layers of dust. Collins moved toward a stack of filing cabinets, their drawers half open like gaping mouths. Inside, brittle papers crumbled at his touch, ledgers, mostly. Names. Dates. Then he found the photographs. Black and white, grainy but unmistakable. Men kneeling, hands bound. Soldiers standing behind them, rifles raised. The dates scrawled in the margins placed them squarely in the Iran-Iraq War. One photo slipped from his fingers. A face stared up at him wide-eyed, terrified. The man's mouth was open, mid-scream. A whisper brushed Colin's ear. "You see us." He jerked back, knocking the cabinet. The sound echoed through the chamber, drawing stares. "Easy, Collins," Carter said, though his own voice was taut. Hayes strode over, snatching the photo. His face didn't change, but his knuckles whitened. Old news. Doesn't explain what's happening now. The radio on Carter's belt hissed. Static, then a voice thin, broken. "Why won't you leave?" Every man froze. Carter grabbed the radio. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then laughter. Guttural, wet, like a man choking on his own blood. The lights flickered. When they steadied, Reynolds was gone. No sound. No struggle. Just empty space where he'd been standing. Hayes swore, sweeping his rifle toward the shadows. Reynolds. Reynolds. No answer. Collins' breath came fast. His flashlight beam trembled as he scanned the room. Then movement. A shadow darker than the others, sliding along the far wall. Tall. Shoulders hunched. It turned its head. No face. Just a void where a face should be. Collins' throat locked. The radio exploded with noise, a chorus of screams, overlapping, pleading. "Leave. Leave. Leave." Carter ripped the battery pack free, killing the sound. The sudden silence was worse. Rafi cubed back toward the door, his voice a whisper. "They are here. The ones who died here. They do not rest." Hayes rounded on him. "Cut the ghost story. Reynolds is missing, we find him." But Collins knew. They all knew. Reynolds wasn't missing, he was taken. And the thing that took him was still in the room with them. The temperature plummeted. Frost spiderwebbed across the concrete. Somewhere in the dark, something whispered Reynolds' name. Then the lights went out. The darkness swallowed them whole. Collins' breath came in ragged gasps, the cold searing his lungs. Around him, the squad erupted into chaos shouts, the clatter of rifles, boots scuffing against concrete as men scrambled blindly. Hold position. Carter barked, but his voice was nearly drowned out by the rising tide of whispers. They slithered through the black, overlapping, hissing, some in Arabic, some in English, all threaded with the same undercurrent of agony. Then the screaming started. It wasn't human. Not entirely. The sound tore through the bunker like a physical force, a chorus of raw, animal terror. Collins clapped his hands over his ears, but the noise burrowed into his skull, vibrating in his teeth. Hayes' flashlight flickered on, the beam shaking violently in his grip. "Reynolds," he roared, sweeping the light across the chamber. The shadows seemed to recoil, but not fast enough. At the far end of the room, something moved. Tall. Too tall. Its limbs bent at wrong angles, its silhouette smeared like wet ink. The flashlight beam passed through it, illuminating nothing. Collins' stomach lurched. There. The scream cut off abruptly. Silence rushed in, thick and suffocating. Then, from the hallway, a wet, choking gasp. Reynolds' voice. "Help me." Hayes didn't hesitate. He lunged toward the sound, Collins and Carter close behind. The flashlight beam carved a narrow path through the dark, revealing streaks of fresh moisture on the walls, dark, glistening. Not water. The hallway ended in a dead-end storage room. The door hung ajar, the gaping blackness beyond pulsing with the sound of ragged breathing. Hayes kicked the door open. Empty, except for the radio on the floor. It crackled to life as they stared, Reynolds' voice spilling from the speaker but wrong, stretched thin, syllables unraveling. "They're inside me," the transmission cut to static. Collins' hands shook. Behind them, the squad's radios erupted in unison, a cacophony of screams, static, and that same broken voice. Carter grabbed his own radio, fingers white-knuckled. "Command, this is Echo 7. We have a man down, possible hostile contact, request immediate evacuation." The response was instant, clipped. "Negative, Echo 7. No unauthorized personnel in your sector. Hold position and await further orders." Hayes snarled. "What do you mean, no personnel? We just lost a man." Static. Then, colder, Private Reynolds is on perimeter watch. Has been for hours. Ice slithered down Colin's spine. Rafik stood in the doorway, his face ashen. "They take pieces of you first," he whispered. "Your voice, your face, then the rest." The lights flickered back on. The squad stood frozen, weapons raised, breaths fogging in the lingering cold. The bunker was silent. No whispers, no screams, no Reynolds. Hayes turned to Carter, his voice low. "We need to log this. Now." Carter hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. He pulled out a notepad, scribbling the time, the details, the screams, the shadow, the radio. The words looked absurd on paper, like the script of a bad horror movie. Collins watched as Carter tore out the page, folded it, and slipped it into his vest. "A man needs to know," he muttered. Hayes' laugh was hollow. "They already do." Outside, the wind howled against the bunker's walls. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable whispers, laughing, waiting. The squad huddled in the bunker's central chamber, the air thick with the scent of sweat and gun oil. The generator hummed weakly, casting flickering light over their exhausted faces. Collins rubbed his hands together, trying to chase away the unnatural chill that clung to his bones. Rafik stood apart from the soldiers, his back pressed against the wall as if afraid the shadows might reach for him. His fingers trembled as he lit a cigarette, the flame wavering in his cupped hands. Hayes shot him a glare. "You got something to say it." Rafik exhaled smoke, his gaze darting to the darkened hallways. "This place, it is cursed." Collins scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. "Cursed? How?" Rafik hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "During the war, Saddam's men used this bunker. Not for soldiers. For prisoners. Hundreds of them. They brought them here, lined them against the walls." He gestured to the dark stains Collins had noticed earlier. "And shot them. Then, no trials, no mercy." Carter's jaw tightened. "We've seen execution sites before. That doesn't explain what's happening now." Rafik shook his head. "You do not understand. These men were not just killed. They were forgotten. No graves. No names. Their bodies were burned, their ashes left to rot in the desert." He took a shaky drag. "In my country, we say the dead do not rest when they are denied their rights. Their souls stay. They hunger." Hayes barked a laugh, but it was brittle. "So what? Ghosts took Reynolds. That's your explanation?" Rafik met his eyes. "You heard the screams. You saw the shadow. Tell me, Sergeant, what do you think took him?" Silence. Collins swallowed hard. "If that's true, why us? Why now?" Rafik's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because you are here. And they are always here." A radio crackled on the table, static hissing like a held breath. Hayes snatched it up. "Enough. We're soldiers, not kids telling ghost stories. Reynolds is missing. We find him." Carter nodded, though his fingers tapped restlessly against his thigh. "We'll sweep the bunker again. Full teams, no solo patrols." Collins didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the far wall, where the shadows seemed to ripple without light to stir them. "And if we don't find him?" No one answered. The generator sputtered. The lights dimmed. For a heartbeat, the darkness felt alive. Then the radio erupted a voice, raw and desperate. "They're in the walls, Reynolds." Hayes lunged for the handset. "Reynolds, where are you?" Respond. Static. Then, softer, almost mournful, too late. The transmission died. The squad stood frozen. Rafi Q closed his eyes. "Leave this place," he murmured, "before they take another." Hayes' grip on the radio tightened. "We're not running." But Collins wasn't so sure. Because in the silence that followed, he could have sworn the whispers were getting louder. And this time, they weren't just laughing. They were counting. The desert night swallowed the bunker whole. Private Martinez adjusted the strap of his rifle, his breath fogging in the sudden cold that had settled over the perimeter. Beside him, Reynolds shifted uneasily, his flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness. "You feel that?" Martinez muttered. Reynolds didn't answer at first. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the sand. "Yeah," he said finally, "like someone's watching." Martinez exhaled sharply. "Cut the creepy crap. Just keep your eyes open." They moved in silence, boots crunching over gravel. The bunker loomed behind them, its entrance a black mouth exhaling stale air. The radios on their belts hissed intermittently static, nothing more. Command hadn't responded to their last check-in. Then Martinez saw it. A figure, standing motionless in the distance, just beyond the reach of his flashlight. Tall. Too tall. Its silhouette jagged against the night sky. Martinez froze. Contact. 11 o'clock. Reynolds swung his rifle up, the beam of his light sweeping forward. "Identify yourself." No response. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there watching. Martinez's finger hovered over his trigger. "I don't like this." Reynolds took a step forward. "Hey, identify." The moment his foot hit the sand, the figure vanished. Not like it moved. Not like it ducked or ran. It was just gone. Martinez's pulse roared in his ears. "What was that?" Reynolds' breath came fast. "You saw that, right? You saw it?" Martinez nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, I saw it." The radio on his belt crackled to life. A voice, broken and distant, whispered through the static. "Turn around." Martinez spun, rifle raised. Nothing. Just the empty desert. The bunker. The night. Reynolds' flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness pressed in. Martinez's breath hitched. "Reynolds?" No answer. "Reynolds." Silence. Then, from somewhere impossibly close, a whisper. "They're coming." Martinez's blood turned to ice. The radio screamed. And when the sound cut off, he was alone. The scream from Reynolds' radio shattered the night. Collins and Hayes bolted upright in the bunker's command room, the sound still ringing in their ears before it dissolved into static. Hayes grabbed the handset, his voice sharp. "Reynolds." "Martinez." "Report." Silence. Collins' pulse hammered. They were just on perimeter check-in 2 minutes ago. Hayes' jaw tightened. He adjusted the frequency, his fingers stiff with tension. "Command, this is Echo 7. Possible hostile contact on the perimeter. Request immediate." The radio crackled, cutting him off. A voice cool, detached responded. "Echo 7, negative on hostiles. Thermal scans show no movement in your sector. Advise recalibrating your equipment." Hayes slammed the handset down. Collins swallowed hard. The bunker's walls seemed to press closer, the air thick with the scent of rust and something sour beneath it. "We should go out there." Hayes hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. "Move fast. Stay close." They grabbed their rifles and stepped into the desert night. The cold hit Collins like a slap, unnatural for the Iraqi desert. The moon cast long, jagged shadows across the sand, turning the landscape into a graveyard of shifting shapes. No sign of Martinez or Reynolds. Collins swept his flashlight beam across the perimeter. Martinez. Reynolds. No answer. Just the whisper of wind over sand. Then Hayes stiffened. There. Collins followed his gaze. Two sets of footprints led away from the bunker, then stopped abruptly, as if Martinez and Reynolds had simply vanished mid-step. No scuffle. No drag marks. Just gone. Hayes knelt, examining the prints. His breath fogged in the frigid air. "This isn't right." A sound cut through the silence, a wet, ragged gasp. Collins spun. "Did you hear?" The radio on Hayes' belt erupted. Reynolds' voice, distorted, pleading. "They're inside the walls." Then, a scream, so loud and raw it made Collins flinch. The transmission cut to static. Hayes' face was pale in the moonlight. "We're going back." They retreated to the bunker, their footsteps too loud in the oppressive quiet. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped further. Collins' breath clouded in front of him, the cold gnawing at his skin. Lieutenant Carter met them at the door, his expression grim. "Command says it's interference. Sandstorms messing with the signals." Hayes didn't blink. "Martinez and Reynolds are gone." Carter's jaw twitched. "We'll sweep the area at first light." Collins clenched his fists. "They're not out there." A beat of silence. Carter's gaze flicked to the darkened hallway behind them. Then, quietly, "I know." The admission hung in the air like a held breath. Rafiq stood in the corner, his eyes hollow. "They will not stop," he murmured. "Not until they have taken us all." Hayes rounded on him. "Then what do we do?" Rafiq's voice was barely audible. "We leave." Carter shook his head. "Not an option. Command's orders." Collins' flashlight flickered. The shadows at the edges of the room seemed to shift, stretching toward them. Then the radio crackled again. A new voice, this time Martinez, but wrong, his words slurred and broken. "They showed me. What happens next?" The transmission ended with a wet, choking sound. Hayes ripped the battery from the radio. The silence that followed was worse. Outside, the wind howled against the bunker's walls. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable whispers. "Counting. 3 down," they murmured. 3 to go. The deeper they pushed into the bunker, the colder it got. Collins' breath curled in front of him, the air so frigid his teeth ached. His flashlight beam trembled as it swept across the concrete walls, revealing patches of frost that shouldn't exist in the desert's sweltering grip. Temperatures dropping like, Hayes muttered, rubbing his gloved hands together. "Something's wrong with the ventilation." Collins didn't answer. The cold wasn't just in the air, it clung, seeping through his fatigues like oil. His fingers had gone numb around his rifle. Lieutenant Carter led the way, his jaw set. "Check the next room. If it's structural, we'll find the breach." The door at the end of the hall was rusted shut, its hinges groaning as Carter forced it open. Beyond it, darkness yawned thicker than before, swallowing their flashlight beams like fog. Then the cold hit. Collins gasped. It was like stepping into a freezer. the kind of cold that burned skin and stole breath. His lungs seized. Frost crackled underfoot, spreading in jagged veins across the floor. The room was empty. No broken pipes. No vents. Just 4 concrete walls and a ceiling lost in shadow. And the cold. The impossible cold. Private Dawson, the youngest of the squad, hesitated at the threshold. His breath came in short, panic bursts. "Sarge, I don't think we should go in there." Hayes shot him a glare. "It's a room, Dawson. Move." Dawson didn't. His fingers whitened around his rifle. "No. Listen." At first, Collins heard nothing. Then, a whisper. Not from the room. From the hallway behind them. A voice rasping, barely audible. "Don't." Collins spun. The corridor was empty. Hayes exhaled sharply. "Enough. We're checking it." He stepped inside. And the moment his boot touched the frost, the whispers erupted. Dozens, hundreds, overlapping, pleading, screaming in languages Collins didn't know. The sound wasn't just in his ears, it vibrated in his bones, a chorus of agony that made his vision blur. Dawson staggered back, clapping his hands over his ears. Jesus Christ. Carter lunged for Hayes, grabbing his arm. "Fall back. Now." Hayes stumbled out of the room, his face ashen. The moment he crossed the threshold, the whispers stopped. Silence. Collins' pulse hammered in his throat. His breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the air between them. Dawson was shaking. What was that? No one answered. Rafiq stood at the edge of the group, his eyes fixed on the open door. "This is where they died," he said quietly. "Not just execution. Trapped." Hayes wiped frost from his sleeve. His hands were steady, but his voice wasn't. "It's a malfunction. Underground chill. Something." Collins stared into the room. His flashlight beam barely pierced the dark, but for a second, just a second, he thought he saw shapes, figures, hunched against the walls, their mouths open in silent screams. Then the light flickered. The shapes were gone. Carter exhaled sharply. "Seal it." Hayes didn't argue. They slammed the door shut, the metal screeching in protest. Dawson drove a rusted pipe through the handles, barricading it with trembling hands. No one mentioned the frost already creeping under the door. No one mentioned the whispers still humming in their skulls. And no one talked about the shadow that had flickered in the corner of the room just before the door closed. Tall, hunched, watching. Back in the command room, the squad sat in silence. The radio crackled, static hissing like a held breath. Collins rubbed his arms, trying to chase away the cold still clinging to him. It didn't work. Somewhere deep in the bunker, the whispers began again, and this time they were calling his name. The morning light did nothing to ease the tension in the bunker. Collins sat on the edge of his cot, rubbing the exhaustion from his eyes. The whispers had followed him into fitful sleep, threading through his dreams like smoke. When he jolted awake, gasping, the air had been so cold he could see his breath. Hayes tossed a ration pack onto the table with a grunt. "Eat. We're running low." Collins peeled open the pack, then frowned. "This is half empty." Hayes paused. "What?" Collins upended the pouch. A few crumbs tumbled out. "It's been opened." A beat of silence. Then Carter stood, crossing to the supply locker. He yanked it open, his shoulders stiffening. The squad crowded behind him. The locker, stocked the night before, was nearly barren. Rations torn open, water bottles drained, medical supplies scattered as if someone had rifled through them in a frenzy. Dawson's voice wavered. "Who was that?" "No one," Hayes snapped. "No one's been in here but us." Colin's stomach twisted. The locker had been locked. He'd checked it himself before watching the rotation. Rafiq lingered near the door, his fingers tracing the edge of a dark stain on the wall. "They are hungry," he murmured. Hayes whirled on him. "Enough with the ghost stories. This is sabotage or..." A sound cut him off. A wet, ragged chewing from the hallway. The squad froze. Colin's grip tightened on his rifle. The noise was unmistakable. Someone, or something, gulping down food with desperate, animal urgency. Hayes moved first, weapon raised. He edged toward the sound, the squad falling in behind him. The chewing grew louder, wetter, punctuated by choked gasps. Then they turned the corner. The hallway was empty. But on the floor, a single ration pouch lay torn open, its contents smeared across the concrete like something had licked it clean. Dawson gagged. What was that? A shadow flickered at the edge of Colin's vision. Tall, hunched, gone before he could turn. The radio in Carter's hand crackled to life. A voice, Martinez's, but distorted, his words stretched and slurred. "You don't understand. We're so hungry." Static swallowed the rest. Hayes' face was ashen. "That's not possible." Rafiq's whisper was barely audible. "They are here. And they are always hungry." Colin stared at the empty ration pouch, his skin crawling. The whispers began again. This time they weren't laughing. They were begging. The generator sputtered, plunging the hallway into near darkness. Sergeant Hayes tightened his grip on his rifle, the cold biting through his gloves. The air smelled of rust and something worse, like old meat left to rot. Collins walked beside him, his breath fogging in the unnatural chill. "You think Command's gonna pull us out after this?" Hayes didn't answer. His eyes scanned the shadows ahead, his pulse a steady drumbeat in his throat. The bunker had been silent since the rations vanished, but the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. Then he saw it. At the far end of the corridor, where the last flickering bulb cast more shadow than light, something stood. Tall. Too tall. Its silhouette was wrong, shoulders hunched beneath the low ceiling, limbs elongated like stretched film. No face. Just a void where features should have been. Hayes froze. Collins followed his gaze. "Sarge?" The shadow moved. Not like a man. Like smoke, fluid and deliberate, gliding forward without sound. The temperature plummeted. Hayes' breath hitched, his fingers numb around the rifle stock. "Contact," he hissed. Collins raised his weapon, his voice tight. "There's nothing." The shadow lunged. Hayes fired. The gunshot cracked through the bunker, deafening in the confined space. The muzzle flash illuminated the hallway for a split second, long enough to see the shadow ripple, its form distorting like water struck by a stone. Then it was gone. The echo of the shot faded. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of gunpowder and something sour. Colin's voice shook. "What was that?" Hayes didn't answer. His hands were steady, but his breath came too fast. The bullet had struck the far wall, no blood, no impact mark, just concrete. Like he'd shot at nothing. The radio on his belt crackled. Lieutenant Carter's voice, sharp with static. "Hayes, report." "We heard gunfire." Hayes grabbed the handset. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. "False alarm. Thought I saw something." A pause. Then, colder, "Stand down. Command's on the line. They want answers." Hayes exhaled through his nose. "Copy." Collins stared at the empty hallway. You saw it too, right? Hayes holstered his sidearm. I saw something, but not nothing. Never nothing. The squad regrouped in the command room, their faces drawn. Carter stood over the radio, his jaw clenched. The voice on the other end was crisp, dismissive. Stress-induced hallucinations. You're running on no sleep. Hostile environment. Hayes cut in. With respect, sir, we've lost 3 men. That's not stress. That's contact. Static hissed. Then, flat. Thermal scans show no hostiles in your sector. No movement. No heat signatures. You are to hold position until relieved. Collins' stomach turned. They're lying. Carter shot him a warning look, but Hayes didn't argue. His gaze flicked to the hallway, to the spot where the shadow had been. Rafik stood apart, his fingers tracing the edge of a bullet casing embedded in the wall. They do not want you to know, he murmured. Hayes rounded on him. Know what? Rafik met his eyes. That this has happened before. Silence. The radio died with a final burst of static. Outside, the wind howled against the bunker's walls. And beneath it, so faint Hayes almost missed it, came the sound of laughter. Soft, hungry, and getting closer. The whispers followed Collins into sleep. He dreamed of the bunker, not as it was now, but as it had been. The walls were slick with fresh blood, the air thick with the stench of gunpowder and sweat. Men knelt in rows, their hands bound, their faces hollow with terror. Soldiers stood behind them, rifles raised. A voice, guttural and commanding, barked an order in Arabic. The shots rang out. Collins jolted awake, gasping. His cot was damp with sweat, the nightmare clinging to him like a second skin. Across the room, Dawson thrashed in his sleep, his lips moving soundlessly. Then the screaming started. Not from Dawson, from the hallway. Collins was on his feet before his mind caught up, his rifle in his hands. Hayes and Carter burst into the room, their faces pale in the flickering emergency lights. Who's on watch? Carter demanded. Hayes checked his roster. No one. Everyone's accounted for. The scream came again, raw, human, choked off abruptly. Collins' blood turned to ice. That's Reynolds. Hayes shoved past him, rifle raised. The squad fell in behind him, their flashlights cutting through the bunker's oppressive dark. The scream had come from the east corridor, where the cold spot had been. The hallway was empty, but the floor, Collins' stomach lurched. Drag marks scored the dust, deep and frantic, as if someone had been pulled kicking toward the dead-end room. The door stood slightly ajar, frost creeping from the gap. Hayes kicked it open. Empty, except for the radio on the floor. It crackled to life as they stared, Reynolds' voice spilling from the speaker but wrong, syllables stretched and broken. They're inside me. Static swallowed the rest. Dawson backed away, his breath coming in short. Panic bursts. I saw them. In my dream. Faceless things dragging men into the dark. Carter grabbed his shoulder. Focus. It was just a nightmare. But Collins knew. They all knew. The same dream. The same screams. The same figures. Hayes' jaw tightened. We're barricading in the command room. Full lockdown until daybreak. No one argued. Back in the command room, Carter radioed command again, his voice tight. We need immediate evac. Hostile contact confirmed. The response was instant. Clipped. Negative. Echo 7. No unauthorized personnel in your sector. Hold position. Hayes ripped the handset from Carter's grip. We have men missing. You sending a team or not? A pause. Then, colder thermal scans show no hostiles, no missing personnel on record. Maintain discipline, Sergeant. The line went dead. Silence. Rafi Q sat in the corner, his fingers tracing the edge of a bullet casing. "They will not help you," he murmured. "They already know what happens here." Colin's hands shook. The whispers slithered back in, louder now, threading through the silence. Counting. 4 down, they murmured. 2 to go. Hayes met Colin's eyes across the room. For the first time, the sergeant looked afraid. Outside, something pounded on the bunker door. Once, twice. Then the radio screamed a single, shattered word, "Leave." The lights went out. And in the dark, the whispers began to laugh. The command room's surveillance monitor flickered, casting a sickly blue glow over the squad's exhausted faces. Lieutenant Carter rewound the footage again, his fingers stiff with tension. The timestamp read 02:17, the exact moment the screams had torn through the bunker. Static. Nothing but rolling waves of gray noise, swallowing the hallway whole. No shadow figures. No Reynolds. Just empty corridors and the eerie absence of sound where there should have been screams. Collins leaned closer, his breath fogging the screen. "Run it back." Carter obliged. The footage played smoothly until the exact second the screaming started, then dissolved into chaos. No glitch, no distortion. Just static. Hayes slammed his fist on the desk. "That's not interference." Tech specialist Dawson hunched over the console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the room's creeping chill. "For systems clean. No malfunction. No tampering." He swallowed hard. This shouldn't be possible. Rafiq stood near the door, his arms crossed tight over his chest. "The dead do not wish to be seen," he murmured. Hayes shot him a glare but didn't argue. His jaw worked silently as Carter ejected the drive, slotting it into a secure case. "Command needs to see this." Colin's laugh was hollow. "You think they don't already know?" A beat of silence. The unspoken truth hung between them, the missing men, the denials, the way every request for backup had been met with the same clipped refusal. No hostiles, no movement. "Hold position." Dawson exhaled shakily. What if we're not the first team this has happened to?" Hayes' grip tightened on the case. "Then that means command's been feeding us to this place." The radio crackled to life. No static this time, just a voice, dry, bureaucratic, utterly devoid of urgency. "Echo 7, this is command. Prepare for debrief. Upload all footage immediately." Carter's fingers hovered over the drive. His voice was low. "They're not asking for the corrupted files." Hayes' smile was razor thin. "Because they already know they're corrupted." Colin's stomach turned. The whispers slithered back in, threading through the silence. Not laughing now, counting. 5 down, 1 to go. Outside, the wind howled against the bunker's walls, and beneath it, something pounded on the door once, twice, then stopped. Waiting. The monitor flickered again. This time, the static cleared. For one horrifying second, the screen showed the hallway outside, but not empty. Figures. Dozens of them. Hunched, emaciated, their mouths stretched in silent screams. Then, the screen went black. The radio died. And in the suffocating dark, Collins realized the truth. They were never meant to leave. The bunker had been hungry, and command had delivered them right to its teeth. The bunker's lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the concrete walls. Private Collins exhaled sharply, his breath fogging in the unnatural chill that had settled over the command room. The squad had been on edge since the camera footage dissolved into static, since they'd seen those things in the hallway. Sergeant Hayes paced near the radio, his rifle slung tight across his chest. Reynolds was on perimeter watch, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "He checked in 20 minutes ago." Lieutenant Carter frowned, glancing at the duty roster. "Who relieved him?" Silence. Colin's stomach twisted. No one. Watch rotation wasn't for another hour. Hayes stopped pacing. His fingers twitched toward his sidearm. Then, where is he? The radio crackled to life, a burst of static, then silence. Dawson swallowed hard. We should sweep the perimeter. Carter nodded, though his jaw was tight. Full team. No splitting up. The desert night swallowed them the moment they stepped outside. The air was still, the moon a pale smudge behind thin clouds. Collins swept his flashlight beam across the sand, the light trembling in his grip. Reynolds' last known position was the Eastern Guard post, a rusted metal chair beneath a tattered awning. Empty. No rifle. No gear. Just a half-finished cup of coffee, still steaming in the cold. Hayes knelt, examining the ground. His flashlight caught deep gouges in the sand, not footprints. Drag marks. They led away from the post, then stopped abruptly, as if Reynolds had been lifted straight off the ground. Collins' throat tightened. No blood. Hayes didn't answer. His light followed the marks to the bunker's outer wall, where the concrete was streaked with dark, glistening handprints, too large to be human. Dawson backed away, his voice thin. We should go back inside. The radio on Carter's belt hissed. A voice Reynolds, but distorted, syllables stretched and broken. There, inside the walls. Static swallowed the rest. Hayes grabbed the handset. Reynolds, where are you? Respond. No answer. Just the whisper of wind over sand. Then, from the bunker's entrance, a sound. A wet, ragged gasp. Collins spun, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The doorway stood empty, but the concrete around it was moving. Shadows. Not cast by anything, not fading with the light. They slithered across the walls like oil, pooling at the threshold. Hayes raised his rifle. Fall back, now. They retreated to the command room, barricading the door behind them. The cold was worse now, gnawing at their bones. Dawson's hands shook as he checked the surveillance feed. Static. Every camera. Every angle. Nothing but rolling gray noise where Reynolds should have been. Carter exhaled sharply. Command needs to know. Hayes' laugh was hollow. They already do. The radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't Reynolds' voice. It was a chorus. Dozens of voices, overlapping, screaming in languages Collins didn't know, all threaded with the same raw terror. Then, clear as gunfire, a single word, run. The lights went out, and in the dark, something scratched at the door. The radio screamed. Reynolds' voice tore through the command room, raw and shattered, his words barely human. They're inside me. Then static sharp, deafening before the transmission cut to silence. Collins' hands clenched around his rifle. The air was thick with the scent of rust and something sour, like meat left to rot in the sun. Hayes grabbed the handset, his knuckles white. Reynolds. Respond. Nothing. Lieutenant Carter's jaw tightened. Command's not going to help us. Dawson's breath came in short, panicked bursts. We have to go out there. We can't just leave him. Stand down. Hayes' voice was steel, but his eyes flicked to the shadows creeping along the walls. Command says thermal scans show no movement. No hostiles. Collins swallowed hard. Then where is Reynolds? The radio crackled again, a new voice this time. Cool. Detached. Command. Echo 7, confirm status of Private Reynolds. Hayes hesitated, then keyed the mic. Missing. Possible hostile contact. The response was instant. Negative. Private Reynolds is on perimeter watch. Has been for hours. Ice slithered down Collins' spine. Dawson's voice wavered. But we saw him, we heard him. Static hissed. Then, From the speaker, Reynolds' voice soft, broken, "You didn't see anything." The transmission died. Silence. Rafiq stood near the door, his fingers tracing the edge of a bullet casing embedded in the wall. "They take pieces of you first," he murmured. "Your voice, your face, then the rest." Hayes slammed the radio down. "We're not sitting here waiting to be picked off. We find Reynolds." Carter nodded, though his fingers tapped restlessly against his thigh. Full sweep. No solo patrols. The hallway was colder than before, the air thick with the metallic tang of old blood. Colin's flashlight beam trembled as it cut through the dark, revealing streaks of moisture on the walls, dark, glistening, not water. Then he saw the handprint, pressed into the concrete, fingers splayed, too large to be human. The edges were smeared, as if whatever made it had been dragged away. Hayes' breath fogged in the frigid air. Move. They followed the trail, their boots scuffing through layers of dust. The whispers started again, soft at first, then rising, overlapping, a chorus of choked pleas and broken laughter. The corridor ended at a dead-end storage room. The door hung ajar, frost creeping from the gap. Hayes kicked it open, empty, except for the radio on the floor. It crackled to life as they stared, Reynolds' voice spilling from the speaker, stretched, distorted. "They showed me. What happens next?" The transmission ended with a wet, choking sound. Dawson gagged. "We need to leave, now." Command's voice, crisp and final. "Echo 7, hold position. Reinforcements en route." Hayes' laugh was hollow, like. The whispers surged louder, closer, threaded with a new word, repeated like a mantra. "Leave, leave, leave." The lights flickered. In the split second of darkness, Collins saw them, figures, hunched and emaciated, lining the hallway. Their mouths stretched in silent screams. Then the light returned. The hallway was empty. Hayes grabbed Collins' arm, his grip bruising. "We're getting out." They ran. The bunker's entrance loomed ahead, a sliver of moonlight cutting through the dark. Behind them, the radio screamed, and the shadows moved. Collins didn't look back. The desert air hit his face like a slap, but the cold didn't fade. It clung, and as the bunker's door slammed shut behind them, the whispers followed. Soft, hungry, counting. 5 down, 1 to go. The command room smelled of sweat and gun oil, the air thick with the weight of unsaid words. Collins knelt beside the rusted filing cabinet, his fingers brushing against brittle papers that crumbled at his touch. The squad had barricaded themselves inside after the last encounter, the door reinforced with anything they could find: chairs, tables, even empty ammo crates. Hayes paced near the radio, his jaw clenched. Command still not responding. Either comms are fried, or they're ignoring us on purpose. Collins didn't answer. His flashlight beam caught the edge of something wedged behind the cabinet, a metal box, half hidden beneath layers of dust. He pried it free, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, a stack of yellow documents. The ink faded but still legible. Execution records. Names. Dates. Cause of death. Gunshot. Firing squad. His stomach twisted. Dawson leaned over his shoulder, his breath hitching. Jesus. There's hundreds. Collins flipped through the pages, the same words repeated, line after line. Executed. 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 The dates spanned years: the Iran-Iraq War, then later, after Saddam's fall. Men brought here, killed, forgotten. Then he saw it. A name, one he recognized. Ali Hassan, he whispered. The whispers in the bunker surged, hissing like steam. Hayes froze mid-step. "What did you say?" Collins held up the paper. "This name, Ali Hassan. I've heard it before." Dawson's face paled. The voice. The one that kept screaming in Arabic. That was the name it was saying. A chill settled over the room. Carter exhaled sharply. You're telling me the screams we've been hearing are the men on these lists? Collins finished. Rafik stood near the door, his fingers tracing the edge of a bullet hole in the wall. They do not rest, he murmured. Not when they are denied their rights. Hayes snatched the documents, scanning them with a soldier's efficiency. His hands didn't shake, but his voice did. This isn't just some ghost story. This is a mass grave. The radio crackled to life. A voice, Ali Hassan's, broken and pleading. You see us now. Static. Then, another voice, Reynolds, but wrong. Syllables stretched beyond recognition. They showed me, the walls. They're full. Collins' flashlight flickered. The shadows along the walls twisted, elongating, stretching toward the squad like grasping hands. Dawson backed away, his rifle raised. We need to burn these. Now. Hayes didn't argue. He grabbed a lighter from his pack, holding the flame to the edge of the papers. The fire caught fast, the names curling into ash. The whispers screamed, not in anger and pain. The temperature plummeted, frost spiderwebbing across the floor. The shadows convulsed, their edges fraying like smoke and wind. Then silence. The fire died. The cold lingered. Collins exhaled shakily. Did that work? Rafik's whisper was barely audible. No, you have only made them hungry. Outside, the wind howled against the bunker's walls. And beneath it, the whispers began again, counting. 5 down. 1 to go. The lights flickered. In the split second of darkness, Collins saw them, figures, lining the hallway, their mouths stretched in silent screams. Then the light returned. The radio crackled one last time. A new voice. Commands. Cold. Detached. Echo 7. Hold position. Reinforcements en route. Hayes' laugh was hollow. Liar. The pounding on the door started again, harder this time. Closer. And in the dark, the whispers called Collins' name. The pounding on the door didn't stop. Collins pressed his back against the barricade, his rifle trembling in his hands. Each impact rattled the hinges, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder, and something worse, the metallic tang of old blood, seeping through the cracks in the concrete. Hayes stood beside him, his face a mask of grim determination. We hold until dawn. Then we move. Dawson's laugh was brittle. Dawn. That's 6 hours away. The pounding intensified. The wood splintered, nails screeching as they pulled free. Lieutenant Carter checked his sidearm, his voice low. Command's not coming. The radio crackled to life, static hissing like a held breath. Then Echo 7, this is command. Reinforcements delayed. Hold position. Hayes ripped the handset from the console. You've been saying that for hours. Silence. Then, softer, almost mocking, there are no hostiles in your sector. Maintain discipline. The transmission cut off. Collins' stomach turned. The whispers slithered back in, threading through the silence. Not laughing now, counting. 5 down. 1 to go. Rafik crouched near the door, his fingers tracing the edge of a bullet hole. They are coming, he murmured. Not just for you, for all of you. The temperature plummeted. Frost spider-webbed across the walls, the cold gnawing at Collins' bones. His breath fogged in front of him, the vapor curling like smoke. Then the screaming started. Not from the radio, not from outside. From the walls. A chorus of voices, overlapping, pleading in languages Collins didn't know, all threaded with the same raw terror. The sound wasn't just in his ears, it vibrated in his skull, a cacophony of agony that made his vision blur. Dawson clapped his hands over his ears, his voice a strangled cry. "Make it stop." The barricade shuddered. A crack split the door down the middle, darkness oozing through the gap like ink. Hayes raised his rifle. "Fall back, now." They retreated to the far corner of the room, their weapons trained on the door. The screaming grew louder. The voices resolving into words, "Help us leave there." Inside the walls, the door exploded inward. Not from force, from the shadows. They poured into the room, tall, hunched figures with elongated limbs and voids where faces should be. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing the breath from Colin's lungs. His finger tightened on the trigger, but the shadows didn't attack. They watched. The radio burst to life one final time. A voice, Reynolds, but wrong. Syllables stretched beyond recognition. "They showed me what happens next." Then the lights went out. In the suffocating dark, Collins felt the brush of something cold against his wrist. A whisper, so close it could have been inside his own head. "You're last." And then the screaming wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was his. The darkness swallowed them whole. Colin's scream died in his throat as the cold wrapped around him like a vise. He couldn't see Hayes, couldn't see Dawson, only the inky black and the whispers that slithered through it, counting, always counting. 5 down. 1 to go. The radio screeched to life, the sound jagged and broken. A voice commands, but distorted. Syllables stretched into something unrecognizable spilled from the speaker. "Leave. Leave. Leave." Hayes' flashlight flickered on, the beam cutting a shaky path through the dark. The shadows recoiled, but not enough. They clung to the edges of the light, their edges fraying like smoke. "Fall back." Hayes barked, shoving Collins toward the door. "Move." Collins stumbled, his boots slipping on frost-slick concrete. The whispers surged, louder now, threaded with laughter. Behind him, Dawson's breath came in short, panic bursts. "They're in the walls." The radio exploded with noise, a chorus of screams, overlapping, pleading. "Run." The flashlight beam caught movement. Shadows, dozens of them, peeling away from the walls. Tall, hunched, their limbs bent at wrong angles, their forms smearing like wet ink. Hayes fired. The gunshot cracked through the bunker, deafening. The muzzle flash illuminated the room for a split second, long enough to see the shadows ripple, their edges distorting. Then they lunged. Collins didn't think, he ran. The hallway stretched ahead, endless, the floor slick with something dark and glistening. The cold gnawed at his bones, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, Dawson screamed, a sound cut short by a wet, choking gasp. Collins didn't look back. The bunker's entrance loomed ahead, a sliver of moonlight cutting through the dark. He could see the desert beyond, the open air, the sky, a hand clamped around his ankle. Cold. Too cold. He hit the ground hard, his rifle skittering out of reach. The shadows surged over him, their whispers coalescing into words. "You see us now." The radio, abandoned in the command room, crackled one last time. A voice, his own, but broken. Syllables stretched beyond recognition spilled from the speaker. "They're inside me." Then static. Silence. The moonlight vanished as the bunker's door slammed shut. And in the dark, the whispers began to laugh. 3 months later, the new squad arrived at dawn, their Humvee kicking up dust in the desert heat. The bunker stood as it always had, silent, brooding, its entrance a gaping maw of shadow. Private Ellison adjusted his rifle strap, squinting at the structure. "Home sweet home, huh?" Sergeant Vance didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the bunker's walls, where the concrete was streaked with dark, glistening handprints, too large to be human. The interpreter, a local named Tariq, lingered near the entrance, his fingers worrying the hem of his shirt. "This place, it is not good." Vance snorted. "Yeah, well, neither's the rest of this sandbox." Tariq shook his head. No, men were brought here. Many men. They did not leave. Ellison frowned. What kind of men? Tariq hesitated, then muttered something in Arabic before translating the forgotten. Inside, the bunker was a tomb of stale air and rusted metal. Their boots echoed off concrete walls stained with old, dark patches. The first whisper came as they cleared the main chamber. A hiss of breath, just at the edge of hearing. Ellison spun, rifle raised, but the corridor behind him was empty. You hear that? He asked. Vance didn't even glance back. Hear what? Ellison swallowed. Nothing, just wind. But there was no wind down here. Somewhere in the dark, something whispered his name, and the cycle began again. The radio crackled to life, the sound sharp in the suffocating silence of the bunker. Echo 7, this is command. Immediate evac authorized. Fall back to extraction point Delta. Lieutenant Carter stared at the handset, his fingers white-knuckled around the plastic. The order should have been a relief, but the voice on the other end was wrong. Flat. Toneless. Like something mimicking human speech. Hayes didn't move. That's not command. Colin's breath fogged in the frigid air. The bunker's walls wept condensation, the concrete slick with moisture that smelled faintly of copper. The whispers had stopped an hour ago. The silence was worse. Dawson's hands shook as he checked his rifle. We can't stay here. Carter exhaled sharply. Gear up. Move fast, stay tight. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, their boots silent on the damp concrete. The emergency lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to twitch when no one was looking. Collins kept his rifle trained on the darkness behind them, his finger resting on the trigger guard. The bunker's entrance loomed ahead, a sliver of moonlight cutting through the black. Then the screaming started, not from behind them. From the radio, a chorus of voices, overlapping, pleading, some in English, some in Arabic, all threaded with the same raw terror. Don't leave us there in the walls, you shouldn't have burned the names. Hayes ripped the radio from his belt and hurled it against the wall. The plastic shattered, but the voices didn't stop. They spilled from the broken speaker, rising in volume until the sound vibrated in Colin's teeth. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed them whole. Colin's pulse roared in his ears. He could hear Hayes breathing beside him, feel Carter's shoulder pressed against his own. The cold was unbearable now, gnawing at his bones, stealing the breath from his lungs. Then a whisper, right beside his ear. You're last. Collins fired. The muzzle flash illuminated the hallway for a split second, long enough to see the shadows move, their edges twisting like smoke and wind. Long enough to see the figures lining the walls, their mouths stretched in silent screams. Then blackness. Run. Hayes bellowed. They ran. The bunker's entrance yawned ahead, the moonlight almost blinding after the oppressive dark. Collins didn't look back, didn't slow, not even when the whispers surged behind them, not even when the temperature dropped so low his vision blurred with tears. The desert air hit his face like a slap as he burst into the night. The others stumbled out behind him, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Hayes turned, rifle raised, ready to cover their retreat, and the bunker's door slammed shut behind them. No wind. No hand. Just the heavy, final thud of steel meeting concrete. Silence. The desert stretched empty around them, the moon casting long shadows across the sand. The bunker stood silent, its entrance sealed tight. Dawson collapsed to his knees, his voice a broken whisper. What was that? No one answered. Colin's hands shook as he keyed his radio. Command, this is Echo 7. Evac complete. Request immediate extraction. Static hissed. Then, crisp and clear, negative. Echo 7. Thermal scans show no movement in your sector. Hold position and await further orders. Hayes' laugh was hollow. Told you. The wind howled across the desert, carrying with it the faintest echo of whispers. Counting. 6 down. 0 to go. And as the Humvee's headlights cut through the dark, Collins realized the truth. They'd never left the bunker. Not really. The whispers would follow them home. The debriefing room at Tikrit Base was sterile and bright, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like an angry swarm of insects. Collins sat rigid in his chair, his hands clasped tightly on the metal table to keep them from shaking. The air conditioning was cranked too high, but the cold felt different here, ordinary, human-made, not the unnatural chill that had seeped into his bones back in the bunker. Across from him, Major Harlow flipped through their after-action report with the disinterest of a man reviewing supply manifests. His reading glasses reflected the harsh light, hiding his eyes. The flickering overhead bulb cast sharp shadows across the table, the room silent except for the soft rustle of paper. The walls, painted a dull beige, seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Collins shifted slightly in his chair, acutely aware of the sweat trailing down his back. Outside, the desert wind howled faintly against the thin metal siding. Harlow hadn't looked up once since they entered the room. Every turn of the page sounded louder than the last. Finally, Harlow spoke, breaking the tension. "Let me get this straight," he said, tapping the file. "You're claiming hostile supernatural contact, shadow figures, disappearing men, voices in the walls." Hayes, seated beside Collins, didn't flinch. "We're not claiming anything, sir. We're reporting what happened." His voice was calm, but there was a quiet intensity beneath it, a weight behind every word. Harlow sighed and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. The silence lingered a second longer before he replied. "Sergeant Hayes, you've been in the sandbox long enough to know what combat stress looks like. Sleep deprivation, hypervigilance, auditory hallucinations." He let the words hang in the air, like an accusation. Hayes didn't respond, but Collins felt his own temper starting to rise. Every implication grated like they were being called liars or lunatics. Collins' jaw tightened. "We all heard it. We all saw it." The words were simple, but they rang with certainty. His hands were clenched under the table, fingers digging into his palms. The memory of the bunker's cold air and flickering lights crept in uninvited. He could still picture Martinez screaming before vanishing into the darkness. Harlow turned to him slowly, expression unreadable. "Private," he said, his voice dropping into the patronizing tone reserved for children and shocked grunts. "Your entire squad was operating on minimal sleep in a high-stress environment." He glanced at the report again. The bunker's history alone is enough to. Collins opened his mouth to interrupt, but someone else beat him to it. "It wasn't in our heads," Dawson cut in, his voice cracking. He hadn't spoken much since the extraction, his hands perpetually wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee he never drank. His eyes looked hollow, like sleep had become an impossible concept. Everyone turned to him, surprised by the break in his silence. "Reynolds is gone. Martinez is gone." The cameras, his voice faltered. "Malfunctioned," Harlow finished, "as did your comms. Sandstorms play with electronics out there." Harlow leaned back, tapping the table with a fingernail. "As for your missing men," he slid a folder across the table. "Private Reynolds was found 3 clicks west of the bunker, dehydrated but alive. Claims he got turned around during patrol. Martinez is being treated for heat stroke at Camp Victory." Collins stared at the photos. Reynolds on a cot, an IV in his arm. Martinez sitting up in a medical tent, smiling weakly at the camera. The dates stamped in the corner were from yesterday. His mind reeled. The timeline didn't make sense. They were there when those 2 vanished, gone without a trace. "That's not possible," Hayes said, but his voice lacked its usual steel. The chill in the room deepened, though the air didn't move. No one spoke for several seconds. Harlow leaned forward again, his tone shifting to something colder. Listen to me very carefully. What happened in that bunker stays in this room. No reports, no rumors, no ghost stories spooking the new rotations. His gaze flicked to each of them in turn, settling just long enough to drive his point home. Collins felt the warning in those eyes, a threat beneath the order. You're being reassigned. Fresh posts, fresh starts. The decision wasn't a suggestion. Carter, who had been silent until now, spoke quietly. Sir, with respect, there were records in that bunker. Execution logs. Hundreds of names. If we could just Harlow cut him off with finality. Destroyed in 03, Harlow interrupted, along with any other sensitive material. He stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Dismissed. The word echoed through the cramped room, sealing the conversation shut. No one moved for a moment. Collins clenched his jaw again, frustration simmering just beneath his skin. The walk back to the barracks was silent. The desert sun beat down on them, but Collins couldn't shake the chill. Dust swirled around their boots as they marched in step. The base looked the same as always, but now it felt hollow, like something vital had been scraped clean. Hayes stopped outside their temporary quarters, his face unreadable. Burn your notes. Collins blinked. What? The command hung in the air like a warning. You heard the Major. This never happened. Hayes' voice was low, but his hands betrayed him the tremble as he lit a cigarette, the way his eyes kept darting to the shadows between buildings. He inhaled deeply, but the smoke did nothing to calm his shaking fingers. Dawson let out a shaky laugh. Too late for that. They all stood there for a moment, unsure what to say next. The wind picked up dust, making the shadows between buildings feel darker. That night, Collins lay awake on his cot, the whispers slithering at the edges of his hearing. He reached for the notebook under his pillow, the one where he'd scribbled every detail, every name from the execution logs. The pages were blank. Not torn out, not erased. Blank, as if they'd never been written on at all. Collins stared in disbelief, heart pounding, mind racing for explanations that wouldn't come. Across the room, Dawson whimpered in his sleep. Outside, the wind howled against the barracks walls. And beneath it, so faint Collins almost missed it, you're still last. The cycle wasn't over. It had just begun. The summons came at midnight. Lieutenant Carter stood outside the prefab office, his hands clenched at his sides. The base was eerily quiet, the usual hum of generators and distant patrols absent. Only the flickering fluorescent lights overhead betrayed any sign of life. He hesitated before opening the door, as if something unseen pressed against his chest. Inside, Colonel Voss waited behind a steel desk, his face unreadable in the dim glow of a single lamp. A thick folder stamped classified lay between them. The silence was louder than any alarm. Sit down, Lieutenant. Carter remained standing. With respect, sir, I'd like to know why my squad's reports were dismissed. Voss sighed, rubbing his temples. The exhaustion on his face wasn't just physical, it looked bone deep. Because they're fiction, Carter. Shadows? Ghosts? Missing men who turn up fine? He tapped the folder. This bunker's been swept a dozen times. Nothing but dust and old bullet casings. Carter's jaw tightened. He didn't believe it, not for a second. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Then why the classified files? Carter pressed. For a moment, the colonel's mask slipped a flicker of unease in his eyes. He opened the folder, revealing grainy surveillance stills of the bunker's interior. Empty hallways. Static-filled screens. And in one corner of every image, barely visible, a shadow. Tall. Hunched. Voss snapped the folder shut. You saw nothing. Your men saw nothing. That's the official line. He didn't wait for a response. The weight of denial pressed into the room like a second gravity. Carter leaned forward, his voice low. "Sir, with all due respect?" Voss cut him off, his voice sharp. "You want to show respect? Forget what happened. Burn your notes." He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the lighter's flame flickering against his pale skin. "And if you value your career, your life, you'll never speak of this again." Outside, the wind howled against the prefab walls, and beneath it, so faint Carter almost missed it, a whisper, counting. 6 down, 0 to go. The colonel didn't react, but his fingers trembled as he lit a cigarette, the flame revealing the dark circles under his eyes. Like he hadn't slept in weeks. Like something was keeping him awake. Carter turned to leave. "One more thing," Voss said softly. "Your squad's being split up, effective immediately." Carter froze. "Sir." Voss's voice didn't change. "Hayes to Germany, Dawson to Kuwait. You're headed stateside." The colonel exhaled smoke, his face lost in the haze. "Consider it a favor." The door clicked shut behind Carter. The hallway was empty. But the whispers weren't. They slithered after him, soft and insistent, as he walked back to the barracks. "You can't outrun us. We're in the walls here too." And when he reached his quarters, his notebook lay open on the cot, the pages filled with names. Hundreds of them. In handwriting that wasn't his. The radio on his belt crackled to life. Static. Then, a voice, Voss's, but broken, syllables stretched beyond recognition. "They always send more." The transmission cut off. Outside, a new squad loaded into a Humvee, their laughter loud in the desert night. The cycle was beginning again, and the dead were still hungry. Months later, the whispers followed Collins home. He sat in his cramped apartment, the blinds drawn against the midday sun, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. The walls were too thin, every creak of the floorboards, every muffled voice from the neighboring unit sent his pulse spiking. He'd stopped sleeping. When he did, he dreamed of concrete walls and figures with hollowed-out faces. The VA had diagnosed him with PTSD, combat stress, auditory hallucinations, survivor's guilt. They'd given him pills that made his thoughts sluggish but did nothing to silence the voices that slithered through the dark. "You're last," they murmured. "You're still last." Collins dug his nails into his palms. The squad had been scattered. Hayes to Germany, Dawson to Kuwait, Carter to some desk job stateside. Command had made sure of that. No loose ends, no corroborating stories. But Collins couldn't let it go. He dragged a battered notebook from beneath his mattress, the pages filled with frantic scribbles, names from the execution logs, sketches of the shadow figures, fragments of radio transmissions that shouldn't have existed. Ali Hassan, firing squad. 1988. Reynolds' voice on the radio after he vanished. The way the frost crept under the door. He'd tried to tell the doctors. They'd adjusted his medication. He'd tried to tell his family. They'd exchanged worried glances and spoken to him in the careful tones reserved for the unstable. So he wrote. Page after page, detail after detail, as if committing it to paper could make it real for anyone but him. He hoped the ink would speak where he could not. That each frantic entry might anchor reality before it slipped entirely from his grasp. That, if the truth ever needed telling, the notebook would outlive him. A record, a warning, or a confession, he didn't know which. But he kept writing, because it was the only thing that still made sense. The floorboards creaked. Collins froze. Not the building settling. Not the neighbors. A footstep. Inside his apartment. His hand drifted toward the pistol in his nightstand drawer. The army had discharged him, but old habits died hard. The whispering surged, not in his head this time, but around him, threading through the air like smoke. You see us now. The temperature dropped. His breath fogged in front of him, the cold gnawing at his skin. Then a shadow. Tall. Hunched. Standing in the corner of his bedroom. No face. Just a void where features should have been. Colin's fingers closed around the pistol. The shadow didn't move. It didn't have to. The whispers told him everything he needed to know. They always send more. The cycle never ends. You're still last. Outside, a car door slammed. Laughter floated up from the street, normal, human, oblivious. When Collins blinked, the shadow was gone, but the cold remained. And in the silence, the notebook's pages rustled as if something had brushed past them. Still counting, still hungry, and far, far from finished. The lighter flickered in Sergeant Hayes' trembling hand, the flame casting long shadows across his empty apartment in Germany. The file folder lay open on his kitchen table, photographs, mission reports, scribbled notes in Colin's frantic handwriting. All the evidence they'd smuggled out, all the proof command had tried to erase. The first page curled black at the edges as Hayes held the flame to it. Burn your notes. The colonel's words echoed in his skull, but it wasn't orders that made his hands shake. It was the whispers. They slithered through his apartment at night, murmuring names from the execution logs, names he'd tried so hard to forget. The fire caught, devouring Ali Hassan's name first. His phone rang. Hayes nearly dropped the burning page. The caller ID read unknown. He let it ring 3 times before snatching it up. Hayes, he growled. Static hissed through the line. Then Sergeant. A voice he recognized. Lieutenant Carter. But wrong, the syllables stretched thin, like a recording played at half speed. Hayes' throat tightened. Carter. A wet, choking sound. Not a laugh. Something worse. They sent another team. The line crackled. In the background, Hayes could hear it, the screams. Not from the bunker. From somewhere else, somewhere with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. A hospital, maybe. Or a VA psych ward. His blood turned to ice. Carter, talk to me. Where are you? They're in the walls here too. The call dropped. The fire had spread to the mission reports now, the flames licking at Reynolds' name. Hayes watched it burn, his reflection warping in the heat haze. The whispers surged around him. You should have left us buried. Hayes grabbed his sidearm from the counter, not to use, just to feel the weight of it, the solidity. His phone buzzed again. A text this time. Unknown number. They always send more. Attached was a photo, grainy dark. A new squad standing outside the bunker, their faces blurred by motion. The timestamp was from this morning. Hayes threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a crack, but the screen stayed lit, the image burning into his retinas. The cycle was repeating, and the whispers were getting louder. He turned back to the fire, watching the last of the evidence burn. The flames reflected in his eyes, but the heat didn't reach him. Nothing could touch the cold that had settled in his bones back in that bunker. Outside, the wind howled against his apartment window, and beneath it, so faint he almost missed it, 6 down, 0 to go. Hayes sank into a chair, his sidearm heavy in his lap. The fire burned itself out. The whispers didn't. The desert sun beat down on the new squad as they approached the bunker, their boots kicking up dust in the dry Iraqi air. Private Ellison adjusted his rifle strap, squinting at the concrete structure ahead. It looked like something out of a war documentary, peeling paint, rusted metal, and an entrance that gaped like a wound in the earth. Home sweet home, Sergeant Vance muttered, echoing words spoken months before by another sergeant now reassigned to Germany. The interpreter, a local named Tariq, lingered near the entrance, his fingers worrying the hem of his shirt. This place, it is not good. Vance snorted. Yeah, well, neither's the rest of this sandbox. Tariq shook his head. No, men were brought here. Many men. They did not leave. Ellison frowned. What kind of men? Tariq hesitated, then muttered something in Arabic before translating, the forgotten. Inside, the bunker was a tomb of stale air and rusted metal. Their boots echoed off concrete walls stained with old, dark patches. The first whisper came as they cleared the main chamber. A hiss of breath, just at the edge of hearing. Ellison spun, rifle raised, but the corridor behind him was empty. You hear that? He asked. Vance didn't even glance back. Hear what? Ellison swallowed. Nothing, just wind. By nightfall, the whispers had grown, not words, not quite just sounds, like someone choking. The men joked about desert ghosts, but the laughter died too quickly. The air itself felt charged, as if something was waiting just beyond the edge of their vision. A few tried to ignore it, but the tension was undeniable. Then the radios crackled. Static at first, then a voice garbled, distant, screaming. It wasn't the kind of sound anyone expected to hear out here, and it sent a chill through the group. Vance ripped the headset off like it had burned him. Goddamn interference, he muttered, but his hands shook as he adjusted the frequency, the reality of the situation sinking in. Ellison didn't sleep that night. Somewhere in the dark, something whispered his name, and it seemed to come from all directions. And for the first time, he wondered if Tariq had been right all along. 3 weeks later, the debriefing room at Tikrit Base was sterile and bright, the harsh overhead lights casting long shadows over the table. Major Harlow flipped through the new squad's after-action report with the same disinterest he'd shown months prior, his gaze unfocused. Let me get this straight, Harlow said, tapping the file, his voice flat. You're claiming hostile supernatural contact, shadow figures, voices in the walls. His eyes flickered briefly over the men, but he didn't seem convinced. Vance, seated across from him, didn't flinch. We're not claiming anything, sir. We're reporting what happened, he replied, his voice steady despite the absurdity of their own words. Harlow sighed and removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose, as if trying to stave off a headache. Sergeant Vance, you've been in the sandbox long enough to know what combat stress looks like. Ellison's jaw tightened. We all heard it. We all saw it, he said firmly, trying to push past the disbelief. Harlow slid a folder across the table with a deliberate motion. Your missing man was found 3 clicks west of the bunker, dehydrated but alive. Claims he got turned around during patrol. Vance stared at the photo. Ellison on a cot, an IV in his arm. The date stamped in the corner was from yesterday. The image made his stomach drop. That's not possible, Vance said, but his voice lacked conviction as doubt crept in. Harlow leaned forward, his tone flat and cold. What happened in that bunker stays in this room. You're being reassigned. Outside, another Humvee pulled up, a fresh squad piling out, their laughter loud in the desert night. The cycle continued, and in the bunker's dark halls, the whispers began again, counting, waiting, hungry. Colin sat hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of his apartment, the blue light casting long shadows across the walls. Stacks of files and scribbled notes littered the coffee table, declassified reports, satellite images, and his own feverish annotations. The whispers had grown louder since he'd started digging, slithering through the air like smoke, but he no longer flinched at their touch, his focus sharpened by the hunt for truth. He scrolled through another military database, his fingers stiff from hours of typing. The search parameters were narrow, Saddam-era bunkers, mass executions, unexplained incidents. He could almost hear the echoes of the whispers in the background as he clicked through endless reports. A document loaded slow, encrypted. Collins held his breath as the text resolved on screen, the words taking shape with a sense of dread. Incident report, Al-Hakim Bunker, 2004. Personnel, Delta 6 Squad. Status, Mia. Officially reassigned. Notes, thermal anomalies. Audio disturbances. Final transmission, there in the walls. His pulse quickened, his mind racing. He clicked another link, determined to find more answers. Incident report, Secret West Bunker, 2008. Personnel, Foxtrot 3 Squad. Status, Mia, officially AWOL. Notes, shadow figures on camera. Missing rations. Final transmission, why won't you leave? The pattern was undeniable. The same reports. The same denials. The same hollow-eyed soldiers shipped off to psych wards or reassigned to oblivion. Collins opened a new tab, typing frantically. Military cover-ups. Haunted sites. Iraq. A single result appeared buried deep, nearly erased. Project Blacklight. Classified. The page loaded halfway before freezing, its contents too dangerous to fully display. A grainy image of a bunker schematic, redacted names, and a single unredacted line, containment protocol remains active. Rotation teams advised. The screen flickered, the temperature in the room plummeted. Collins exhaled sharply, his breath fogging in the sudden cold. You see now. The whisper came from behind him, not in his head, not imagined. A voice, guttural and close. He turned slowly, his heart racing. The corner of the room was empty, but the shadows there were too deep, too solid. They moved like they weren't bound by the laws of light, like they were alive in a way that shouldn't be possible. His laptop screen glitched, the image distorting, and for a split second, Collins saw a figure, tall and hunched, reflected in the glass. Then the screen went black. The whispers surged, overlapping, counting. 6 down. 0 to go. Collins reached for his phone, dialing Hayes' number with shaking fingers. The line rang once before connecting to static. A deep, oppressive hum filling his ears. A voice, Hayes, but broken, whispered through. They know you're looking. His breath caught in his throat. The call dropped abruptly. Outside, a car engine turned over, the sound of tires scraping over gravel. Headlights swept across his blinds, casting long, skeletal shadows on the wall. Collins didn't move, his eyes glued to the window, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew they were watching. The military hadn't just dismissed their reports, they'd expected them. And the whispers were counting again, not just for him, for the next squad, for the ones after that. The cycle never ended, and command had been feeding soldiers into it for years. Collins' fingers hovered over the keyboard, the glow of his laptop the only light in his cramped apartment. The email draft stared back at him, anonymized, encrypted, addressed to a journalist known for exposing military cover-ups. He stared at it, the weight of the information sitting heavy on his chest. The bunker is still active. They're sending teams in, knowing what happens. The dead don't stay dead there. Attached, execution records, incident reports, audio files. He hesitated, his mind racing with the consequences of sending it, but his resolve hardened. This was it. The truth would get out. He hit send. The screen flickered. A pop-up appeared, transmission failed. Network error. Collins exhaled sharply, his hands trembling. No, he tried again. Same error. A third time. Message flagged. Content restricted. Panic flared in his chest, the dread settling into his bones. The temperature in the room dropped. His breath fogged in front of the screen, a cold so deep it felt unnatural. The whispers started soft at first, then rising, overlapping. They know. They always know. His phone buzzed violently on the desk. An unknown number. He answered, his pulse pounding in his ears. Static. Davy. Then a voice, cool, detached. Military, Private Collins. You are in violation of Section 17D of your non-disclosure agreement. Report to Fort Meade immediately for debriefing. The line went dead. Collins' hands shook. They'd been monitoring him. Of course they had. The laptop screen glitched again. The email draft was gone. In its place, a single line of text. You are being reassigned. A shadow moved in the corner of his vision, tall, hunched. His breath caught in his throat as he tried to steady himself. But he didn't turn around. He already knew what he'd see. The figure wasn't a person, but something else entirely, something unnatural. The phone rang again, its shrill sound breaking through the oppressive silence. This time he didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his keys from the counter and headed for the door, a sense of urgency driving him forward. They'd find him eventually. They always did. And they would come for him, as they always did. But not yet. Not before he made sure someone else knew the truth. The whispers followed him into the night, counting. Always counting. 6 down. 0 to go. And in the bunker half a world away, a new squad unloaded their gear, laughing under the desert sun. The cycle continued. The dead were still hungry, and command was still feeding them. The declassified file flickered on the screen, its edges blurred by redaction marks. The archivist adjusted his glasses, squinting at the grainy audio waveform labeled Secret Bunker Incident. Final transmission. Just surfaced last week, he murmured. Buried deep. Real deep. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head, but the fatigue in his bones was palpable. The journalist leaned forward, recorder humming in anticipation. What's on it? The archivist hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he considered whether he should proceed. Then, with a resigned sigh, he clicked play. Static hissed through the speakers. Then, a scream. Human. Raw. Stretched thin with terror. They're in the walls. Gunfire. Shouting. A voice haze? Yelling fall back. Then another sound. Not human. Not quite. A wet, guttural chittering, like bone scraping against bone. The transmission cut to static. The journalist's pen froze mid-sentence. Jesus. The archivist exhaled sharply. Wait. The static resolved for one final second, just long enough for a whisper to slither through. You're still last. Then silence. The file auto-redacted itself, black bars swallowing the waveform whole. Access restricted. Classified level Delta. The journalist stared at the blank screen, eyes wide, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. What happened to that squad? The archivist closed the folder, his fingers lingering on the edge. Officially, reassigned. Honorably discharged. And unofficially, a beat of silence. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered. The archivist's voice dropped to a whisper. They never left that bunker. Outside, the wind howled against the archive's windows, carrying with it a sense of finality. And beneath it, so faint it could have been imagination, something laughed. The new squad arrived at dawn, their Humvee kicking up dust in the desert heat. The sun was already oppressive, the heat radiating off the ground in shimmering waves. The bunker stood as it always had, silent, brooding, its entrance a gaping mauve shadow. The men didn't speak as they approached, each of them caught in the grip of something unspoken. Private Ellison adjusted his rifle strap, squinting at the structure. Home sweet home, huh? He tried to joke, but his voice lacked any real humor. Sergeant Vance didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the bunker's walls, where the concrete was streaked with dark, glistening handprints, too large to be human. The interpreter, a local named Tariq, lingered near the entrance, his fingers worrying the hem of his shirt. This place, it is not good. Vance snorted, trying to shake off the tension. Yeah, well, neither's the rest of this sandbox. Tariq shook his head slowly. No, men were brought here. Many men. They did not leave. His words hung in the air, a warning the others didn't quite understand. Ellison frowned. What kind of men? Tariq hesitated, then muttered something in Arabic before translating the forgotten. Inside, the bunker was a tomb of stale air and rusted metal. Their boots echoed off concrete walls stained with old, dark patches, the oppressive silence pressing in on them. The first whisper came as they cleared the main chamber. A hiss of breath just at the edge of hearing. Ellison spun, rifle raised, but the corridor behind him was empty. You hear that? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Vance didn't even glance back. Hear what? Ellison swallowed hard. Nothing. Just wind. But there was no whine down here. Somewhere in the dark, something whispered his name. And the cycle began again. The desert sun bled into twilight as Collins stood on the outskirts of Tikrit, staring at the bunker in the distance. Even from here, he could feel it, the weight of the place, the way it seemed to breathe in the fading light. The whispers had followed him home, but they were quieter now, murmurs at the edge of his hearing, like a radio tune just off frequency. Hayes was gone. Shipped off to Germany, then discharged under a cloud of medical reasons. Dawson had vanished into the VA system, his file stamped with more red ink than text. Carter had stopped answering calls altogether. The squad had fractured, each man carrying his own ghosts, his own silence. Collins lit a cigarette, the flame trembling in his grip, the smoke swirling up into the air like a ghost of its own. He'd tried to tell the story to journalists, to forums, to anyone who would listen. But the words always dried up in his throat, leaving him speechless, powerless. The evidence always disappeared, as if it had never existed in the first place. The whispers always laughed, mocking his futile attempts. The bunker remained, sealed, silent, waiting. A car door slammed behind him. Rafiq stepped out, his face lined with exhaustion. He hadn't been the same since that night. None of them had. The weight of the past, of what they had witnessed, hung heavy on his shoulders. You shouldn't be here, Rafiq said quietly, his voice heavy with concern. Collins exhaled smoke, a long drag, his gaze distant. Neither should you. Rafiq's gaze flicked to the bunker, his eyes narrowing. They sent another team last week. Collins didn't need to ask what happened. He could see it in Rafiq's hollow eyes, the emptiness that had swallowed the man whole. The locals say the screaming is worse now, Rafiq murmured, his voice barely audible, like he was afraid to speak the truth aloud. They hear it even in daylight. Collins crushed the cigarette under his boot, his eyes cold. The wind carried the scent of dust and something older, copper, maybe, or rust. They'll keep sending men, he said, his voice steady but dark. Rafiq nodded solemnly. And the bunker will keep taking them. Silence settled between them, thick and suffocating. The bunker's entrance yawned in the distance, a black mouth exhaling stale air, as if it were waiting for the next soul to enter. Collins wondered if the shadows still moved inside, if the whispers still counted, if Reynolds' voice still crackled through dead radios, reaching out from the past. He turned away, feeling the weight of the place press down on him. The whispers followed. Soft, hungry, counting. 6 down, 0 to go. And as the desert swallowed the last of the light, Collins knew the truth. The bunker would never let him go. Not really. Not while it was still hungry, and command would always send more. The desert wind carried screams into Tikrit after dark. Ali Hassan heard them first. He stood on the roof of his modest home, cigarette burning between his fingers, listening to the night. The sound wasn't human, not quite. It was something older, something roar, the kind of noise that made the hair on his arm stand on end. His wife called up to him from inside, her voice muffled by the walls. "Come inside, Habe. The desert plays tricks at night." Ali didn't move. He knew what he was hearing, the bunker. Always the bunker. Down the street, old man Farid's radio crackled to life despite being unplugged, spitting static and broken Arabic into the empty shop. "They are still here," it whispered, its voice distorted and eerie. "They are always here." Farid crossed himself and threw the radio into the street. The Americans had left months ago, their Humvees kicking up dust as they retreated from the cursed place. But the bunker remained, its concrete walls sweating rust like old bloodstains. The locals avoided it, crossing the street when they passed too close, muttering prayers under their breath. Yet every night, the screams returned. At the tea house, Mahmoud set down his cup with shaking hands. "Last night I saw them," he murmured, his voice trembling with fear. "Shadows. Tall ones, walking the perimeter like guards." The other men shifted uncomfortably. No one mocked him. They had all seen things movement in the corners of their vision, figures standing where no one stood, radios whispering names of men long dead. "The Americans think they sealed it," said Dr. Najjar, wiping his glasses, his voice laced with an eerie calm. "But you cannot seal what was never contained." A child's laughter echoed down the alley outside, except there were no children playing after dark. Not since the bunker's whispers had grown louder. Ali finally stepped down from the roof, but the screams followed him inside. They slithered through the cracks in the walls, under the doors, into the spaces between waking and sleep. His wife pretended not to hear them, but her hands trembled as she lit the evening lamps. In his dreams, Ali saw the bunker as it had been, not under the Americans, not under Saddam, but before. A place of iron and concrete, of men lined up and forgotten. He heard the gunshots, the pleas, the silence that followed, and then the whispers. "You see us now." He woke up gasping, his chest tight with fear. The house was freezing, his breath fogging in the air. The screams outside had stopped, replaced by something worse: silence. The kind of silence that pressed against his eardrums, a physical weight that made his head throb. His wife slept beside him, undisturbed. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Ali knew he had closed it. A shadow moved in the hallway beyond, tall, hunched, gone before he could blink. The radio in the kitchen crackled to life, spitting static and a single broken word soon. Ali did not sleep again that night. And in the bunker, half buried in the desert sands, something waited, counting, always counting. The dead did not rest, and command would always send more.